Thank you and welcome everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. I think sometimes there's a little bit of reverberation if people have got their microphones on. So hopefully everybody will all be muted. The idea is that we keep the videos off except for the panelists that are actually speaking in that individual session. I'm just going to do a brief introduction of who I am and then what the conference is about, and then we will move on to the first of our three sessions of distinguished speakers this afternoon. And the idea is that we will wrap up the formal part at around 6 o'clock and then stay open thereafter for more of an informal networking where people can switch on their videos and their microphones, and then we can have some sort of Q&A in relation to the final session, and then also in relation to any other issues, or just sort of introducing ourselves to each other. In terms of during the course of the sessions themselves, hopefully all of you will, over the last 8 months, have now become experts in the use of Zoom and other internet video and audio technologies, and will know precisely when I say that there's a chat function at the bottom. So if you can put your questions in there, your name will come up in relation to that. So if you have any concerns in relation to confidentiality and so on, there's no need to mention that it is on behalf of your company that you're asking the question. We will make the assumption that the question comes from you, but you're not divulging any internal secrets to your organization. But if you leave it there, I will moderate some of the questions, and then if we have time at the end of each section, I will try and ask some of the panelists some of those questions. We may not get through all of them. The panelists will let us know if they're staying afterwards, so that you can speak to them directly at that stage. I anticipate that both of our two first speakers will not want to do so, as both of them are on strict instructions to stick to certain storyboards and can therefore not speak wholeheartedly and openly in relation to these things. And obviously, as they will be and are dealing with live cases, they clearly cannot comment on any of those things. But we're looking forward to a great session. The whole organization is done through Intelligent Compliance Regulations Management, and this is their first virtual conference. It's an ABC conference generally in terms of new anti-bribery and corruption horizons, the alignment of international laws as well as crisis management practices, and its effect on global business continuity. It's divided into 3 separate days, and this is the first day, which is the ABC Horizon Scanning Day. I'm Patrick Rappo. I'm the chair for this afternoon's event. I was previously at the Serious Fraud Office, not at the same time as one of our next speakers, but many years ago now, 12 years ago, I first started there. So I feel as if I have aged dramatically in the intervening period. But I see that our next speaker from the SFO, Dr. Claire Morris, has not aged as terribly badly as I have. So obviously she's able to handle things a lot better than I ever was. My current place of work is at DLA Piper, and we're involved with sponsoring this event and have been for a number of years. And I do corporate investigations, compliance issues, and resolving issues in front of the regulators as well. Our first session will be looking at a keynote topic with our panelists, Dr. Claire Morris, case controller from the Serious Fraud Office, and David Fuhr, who is from the Department of Justice. I will let David introduce himself first and then Claire afterwards, and look forward to having a fireside chat in relation to them on approximately 4 topic areas, which we'll move on to shortly. But if I can hand over to David to introduce himself more formally first.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope you can hear me. Let me know if there's an issue. Sometimes the internet, especially in situations like this, does not play well. I am in the FCPA unit. I'm an assistant chief in the FCPA unit of the Department of Justice here in Washington, D.C. I've been part of that unit, which, as many of you know, is a specialized unit within the criminal division of the DOJ that is devoted really exclusively to investigating and prosecuting FCPA matters. I've been there for, I guess, about 7 years now. I was previously in private practice at a law firm for, I think, 6 or 7 years. So I've seen sort of both sides, and I'm looking forward to having a frank and hopefully interesting discussion today. And I'll turn it over to Claire with that.
Thanks, David.
Good afternoon. So I am a case controller in a bribery and corruption division at the Serious Fraud Office in the UK. So I'm responsible for 2 investigation and prosecution teams. My cases concern fraud, bribery and money laundering in the UK and overseas. By brief backgrounds, I'm a lawyer admitted to practice in England and Wales and New York and DC. I have a particular expertise in international cooperation. I've been a prosecutor at the SFO for 5.5 years and a case controller since January of this year. So the SFO investigates and prosecutes the most serious and complex cases of fraud, bribery and corruption and associated money laundering in the UK, which includes foreign bribery where there's a UK nexus. We also handling the freezing, confiscation and recovery of the proceeds of crime. And we operate a unique Roskill model where we have joint teams of investigators, prosecutors, accountants and IT experts working as one from day one of the case. Oh.
Thanks, Claire. Now, what
did you catch any of that?
We did. We caught all of that. It started getting a little fuzzy towards the end, but I think you're back online now. Although, to be fair, I was slightly concerned when I heard my headphones saying battery low to me. So I might at some stage have to go and stick my headphones on and then locate another set. So, but before that happens, the next session, the session which we're about to go through, is the session on the experience of working during COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on anti-bribery and corruption cases. And it's described as an open dialogue with the DOJ and SFO. So first of all, if I could go to you, David, and just ask, what were your sort of pre-COVID highlights and sort of current priorities in relation to sort of DOJ activities?
Yeah, look, as 2019 until the spring of this year, when I guess rather suddenly for us, everything came to a halt, at least in terms of going to the office and seeing colleagues. So if I can sort of very briefly recap 2019, many of you, I think, are familiar generally with our enforcement program, but I think it's fair to say it was a very active year for our unit, both on the corporate front as well as in our investigations and prosecutions of individuals. I think we have a pretty good mix. One doesn't go without the other. And for example, last year, we had, I believe, 7 corporate resolutions, some of them coordinated with other jurisdictions, which is something that you've seen, especially over the last 4 or 5 years or so, which I think is becoming a much more common practice now. We also had very significant numbers of individual charges and guilty pleas. We had, I think, 3 trials last year, which for the FCPA unit, as many of you know, trials don't come around that often, and when they do come, they're quite something. So there was several trials, including the very well-known Hoskins case that was tried last year. And then, early on this year, of course, we had the big Airbus resolution together with France and the UK, and then that really then I think gets us into the COVID area. So because that was, I think, in January or so, and then March is really when things changed. So I'll leave it at that. I think we can certainly talk about what has happened since COVID began, but that's kind of the recap. It was basically firing on all cylinders, lots of work. Everybody was very engaged, and that was kind of the last year or so for us. I'll turn it over to Claire.
Yes, so if I can go to like the SFO's current priorities, which are reflected in the last year as well, it's to ensure a greater pace and focus to investigations, and to expand the SFO's intelligence capability so that we build a greater understanding of sector-specific risks in different industries and have a more proactive intelligence-led investigations. We continue to fight corporate economic crime by utilizing deferred prosecution agreements to drive forward better corporate compliance. We aim to use technology to keep up with the data expansion. Another key goal is to continue to build an effective and inclusive workforce at the SFO to continue to attract the highest level of professionals, both investigators, accountants, lawyers, and also to deepen and enhance our international cooperation. So particularly with the US, most of you will be familiar with the Airbus resolution, and as well as France, of course.
Thanks, Claire. It's very helpful. So that really takes us nicely back to you, David, in terms of what the sort of challenges have been in relation to dealing with the sort of COVID period. How has that impacted upon your priorities, and what are the what are the issues that you've had to come across and deal with during this time?
Yeah, I think look, most of the challenges that we have had since the beginning of COVID are, I think, very similar to the challenges that everybody else has had who's working in this field, whether in the United States or in Europe. The most obvious one is that we can't go to our offices. But I have to say, I think, there was perhaps an adjustment period the first 2-3 weeks. We're kind of wondering how this is going to go. But, to be honest, I think it's worked pretty well for us. Fortunately, most of the work that we do can be done remotely in terms of, working on documents, reviewing documents. Thank goodness most of that is electronically available and we don't have to work through paper as much. I think the thing that obviously is on the enforcement side, a bit of a challenge is interviewing witnesses. It's one thing, as you may know, it's one thing to interview someone when you're sitting face to face with them and you can gauge their reactions and you can, have a bit of a back and forth. When it's done, through Zoom or similar methods, I think it's suboptimal. I mean, it's definitely, we have done that, it's workable, but I think both from a defense lawyer perspective and from a prosecutor perspective, I think that is clearly not as helpful and as easily done as it is when it is in person. So that's one issue. I think the other issue we've had is courts. Certain courts have been, for all intents and purposes closed. They are opening up in certain areas, but look, I think that's been a delay in some ways, that it's not as easy as during normal times to have court hearings after a person has been arrested, or even more sort of routine matters. So that's something that, again, I think that's not unique to us. It's just something that all of us are dealing with in the space. But I've got to say, if you look back at the last 6-7 months since this began, I mean, we've been as busy and as active, I think, as before in terms of both corporate resolutions I think about 7 again this year, including, very recently the Goldman 1MDB case, which of course was very, very substantial, and likewise individually. So I think it's, in some ways, we're continuing to work the way we have before, and we're trying to just deal with the obstacles that have come our way. And I think the other thing is uncertain is when is this going to end? It doesn't seem like that's anytime soon. So we're kind of in it for the long haul and are trying to deal with this as is everybody else. But we're working and everybody's working hard, and it's going, I think, perhaps better than we initially contemplated when this all began.
And have you had any issues, just sort of picking up on one point that you haven't mentioned there, which is the effect upon searches, the kind of physical, in-person dawn raids and searching of premises? Or is the culture generally with these resolutions in the US tending to be companies would be coming to you and giving you the materials, and they'd be giving it to you in an electronic format, and as such there hasn't been the need to search and it hasn't been much of an impact? I was wondering if that was the reason that you hadn't mentioned searches, or if they had been impacted in any significant way.
No, so it's a good question, Patrick. I mean, look, searches are part of the arsenal that is available in law enforcement. It's something that is done at times. It's not done in other times, but I don't think that COVID per se has eliminated that possibility. So it's we have continue to have law enforcement, and they are very much involved in everything, and so I don't think that particular aspect has suffered as a result of COVID. It's really more, I think, what I was speaking to is, personally, I think witness interviews and to some extent dealing with courts is the bigger challenge at the moment, and has been.
Yeah. No, well, it is quite surprising how well I think companies, frankly, have adopted, and government, I think, has stepped up to the plate as well, because it's a huge pressure on sort of computer infrastructure and bandwidth, particularly if you're having meetings like this with numbers of people on the line. From a UK perspective, Claire, what's kind of your view of the challenges been and how the SFO's been coping with them?
Well, very similar to the DOJ, we've tried to continue at pace and just adapt to the new challenges. Remote working has been a major challenge, but we have reformed our operational procedures to allow more remote interviewing. So in particular, not just voluntary witness interviews, but compelled interviews have been done using telephone conferencing or video conferencing. We've also been issuing Section 2 notices, which is a power available to the SFO to compel institutions to provide documents, companies, individuals, without need for a court order. So we've continued to issue Section 2 notices electronically during this time, whereas ordinarily you'd need a hard copy signature. So we've continued gathering in data that way, and most of our material has been coming in digital form rather than hard copy, which has been an additional challenge to our IT teams. Some activity has been done in person though, so it does continue interviews and other operational activity. We set up an operational task force, and there's a layer of additional risk assessments going on. So whenever we do any operational activity, we have to go through the operational task force, and everything is reviewed in terms of individual risk assessments for the staff involved, as well as operational risk assessments. So our law enforcement partners considering the risks others involved, be it suspects, witnesses, victims. So there's another layer of that involved. And of course, the impact on staff. So we've had a positive HMCPSI inspection of the SFO's response to COVID. Back in July, they reviewed our initial response from March to May, and it found that the SFO was fairly proficient in terms of communication with staff and adapting to the new reality in terms of issuing equipment to staff. And staff have been remarkably resilient and professional during this time. One of the key challenges, of course, we continue to cooperate with our international partners, and we've been issuing letters of request electronically where it could be received by our partners in that form. And we've, of course, been receiving them electronically, and we've had remarkable cooperation. So during this time, I've been cooperating very closely with the DOJ, in fact, as well as Singapore, Switzerland, and 2 EU member states. And the cooperation has been fantastic, despite the challenges everyone's been going through during this time.
And the audience may well be aware of the KBR challenge, which is has been up to the Supreme Court, which is challenging the extraterritorial application of the Section 2 notices in the KBR case. Is there any indication as to when there might be any decision in relation to that being handed down by the court, or is that another we'll wait and see once they have considered everything and when they make their ruling?
Again, it's a wait and see. We're anticipating the earliest would be January for that. We're not expecting a ruling until then.
Excellent. Well, we'll all be waiting on tender hooks for that one, because presumably that, assuming it's upheld, will have implications as to the SFO being able to use a Section 2 notice potentially for overseas countries to have extraterritorial effect. In terms of successes during the COVID period, apart from the position in relation to business being able to continue as good as normal, David, any other particular successes that work-wise that you want, or cases that you thought it would be useful to indicate at this stage? I'm sure our next panelist will be talking about various sort of updates in the law, but just from your perspective as the man in charge of these things, what are the particular highlights and sort of takeaways in relation to those?
I'm not sure I'm the man in charge, but I think, look, I think, but I think, you know, we've been, I would even consider it a success that we've been working the way we have in the last several months. You know, what, of course, as I think all of you in the audience, the problem is you have no real, you know, no in-person interaction with your colleagues. What I think is difficult is sometimes, you know, these are difficult issues, complex legal issues. One of the benefits of being in the office, of course, is to bounce off ideas of other people, talk through issues like every, you know, lawyer or person in a company does, and that's of course much more difficult. Everything is over telephone, but I think the success is sort of moving things forward the way we have. You know, the Goldman 1MDB resolution is, of course, I think historic in many ways. This was resolved, I think, in the second half of October, you know, with I think record amount of fine for that bribery, and a record number of other authorities who were involved in the resolution and to whom funds were credited. So I think that in many ways is kind of a huge case that was finally resolved in a way that I think is quite remarkable. I think the other aspect, I don't know if it's a success or what you would call it, but I think we've been very active in sort of the, if you want, the, you know, not so much policy making realm, but certainly putting out a number of documents that are, I think, very helpful, including specifically for the compliance community. The updated, you know, memo by the Assistant Attorney General of the Criminal Division concerning the evaluation of the FCPA resource guide, which came out initially in 2012, and, you know, 8 years later now, we updated it with some sort of additional information on more recent case law, on you know, developments that have just happened in this time period, including putting everything into that one document in terms of the key policy things like the compliance program, the corporate enforcement policy, and things like that. So I think those are kinds of things that have happened, frankly, in the last several months, in addition to all the cases that we've been working on. That is hopefully of use and certainly I think of interest to the defense bar and to the compliance community writ large.
Just going forward, David, how do you see?
Patrick, I think you're on mute. Okay.
I was just saying, just going forward, how do you see your priorities changing, or is there any particular areas of focus that you're looking at?
Sorry, I think you're asking me going forward whether we would have sort of a specific focus or perhaps change priorities.
Yes.
Yeah. So look, and I don't know if that's in the context of the just recent election that happened, I guess, last week here.
We couldn't possibly ask you to
I
comment.
think regardless of that. No. And I was going to say, regardless of that, I don't anticipate any real change in the way the program is going to work. I think this has been, the sort of the focus on both companies and individuals has been there in the past. It is continuing. I think we have, about 36, 37 prosecutors in the unit. So perhaps more than we've had in the past. And I don't think that the FCPA enforcement is going to change in the way it's done in a material way. So I think it's going to be pretty similar to the way we've had in the last few years. And I don't, from my vantage point, don't anticipate any real or frankly, certainly not dramatic changes. And I don't think that there's any different focus that necessarily will come, in the future. I think it's going to be much of the same.
Excellent. And Claire, from your perspective on the UK side and the SFO side, what's been your particular sort of successes that you've seen during the sort of COVID period, apart from the success of just being able to operate at a high capacity?
So we've had quite a lot of successes despite the COVID challenges. So first of all, in terms of trials, so the Unioil trial was almost complete at Southwark Crown Court as we went into national lockdown in March, with all the evidence had been heard. And it was among the first trials in the country to come back in May 2020. And so by July, 2 individuals were convicted of conspiracy to give corrupt payments. A third had already pled guilty to 5 offences of conspiracy to give corrupt payments. So that's a major success that we were one of the first trials to resume and end in convictions. In terms of other prosecutions, so we've brought charges in a number of cases. So some of the highlights are GPT. So in July, the SFO announced it brought charges against the Special Project Management and 3 individuals regarding corruption in connection with contracts awarded in Saudi Arabia between 2007 and 2012. Another key highlight is the G4S case, where we charged 3 individuals, former executives of G4S Care and Justice Services, with offences connecting to a scheme to defraud the Ministry of Justice. In the Axiom case, we charged 3 men with multiple offences in connection with the investigation into the collapse of the Axiom Legal Financing Fund. And then in Bally Group and Bally Steel, we charged 5 individuals in connection with conspiracy to defraud in regard to the affairs of Bally Group and Bally Steel, involving the fraudulently obtaining funds from multiple banks, both in the UK and overseas. Then in terms of resolutions as well, so we've concluded 2 more deferred prosecution agreements during this time. So G4S being one of them, where G4S accepted responsibility for 3 offences of fraud against the MOJ in connection with contracts for the provision of electronic monitoring services, so tagging. And it involves a financial penalty of 38.5 million and the SFO's full costs of 5.9 million. as well as a compensation to the MOJ had already been agreed as part of the civil settlement before. And the latest DPA is our 9th DPA in Airline Services Limited, was just confirmed on the 30th of October. So this involves the failing to prevent bribery arising from the use of an agent to win contracts to refit airliners for Lufthansa. And the contracts are together worth over 7.3 million. We've also had a number of successes in terms of recovering the proceeds of crime. So some highlights are in Afrin. We obtained a confiscation order for 5.45 million against former Afrin employees. And in September, we made use of a listed asset recovery order to recover over £500,000 worth of jewellery in a long-running mortgage case. And of course, like the DOJ, we've also used this time to consider our policies. So we have issued a revised, published a revised chapter of our operational handbook on deferred prosecution agreements. This is internal guidance, but we've published it for transparency so that companies may have some expectations, may understand what our expectations are of them in terms of cooperating with us. And we've also been reviewing our external counsel panel lists to make them, with the idea of making them more diverse and representative of the bar as a whole. So applications have been received and evaluations are ongoing to expand and diversify our council panel lists.
A busy roster of cases, settlements, and events there by the signs of things. I'm glad to hear that GPT's finally been resolved. That was one of my cases back in, I think, 2010. I was case controller of that case, so I'm glad to see that it's speeded its way through the system and is being resolved a decade later. So I won't ask you about any of the details in relation to that. But in terms of the question which I'd asked David earlier about the impact upon searches, is that something that's had COVID has had an impact on during this period, or is the fact that there are a lot more DPAs going up to 9, meaning that actually more companies are coming in and handing over material, and you've been able to get material that way, and therefore it hasn't had any real impact on business?
Well, I think as a challenge to law enforcement in general, we just have extra risks to consider, both to our officers as well as our counterparts. So if we do searches, we usually do them in cooperation with the NCA or other police forces. So we have to consider other risks to them, and it's about liaising and cooperating with them as well. So in general, we see if there's any other way that we could obtain the information that we were after, and if there's another way, such as using a Section 2 notice or voluntary provision of this information, obtaining it digitally without the need for officers to go in person to conduct a search, then of course we will do it a different way, but there is processes in place to continue in-person activities, and then searches are included in that.
That's helpful, thank you. David, just in terms of looking down the pipeline, what's your kind of lessons learned and sort of key takeaways for our audience in sort of remaining 10 minutes that we have as to what they should be doing, what they should be mindful of, and what they should be looking out for?
Yeah, look, I would be happy to address that. I don't want to provide advice to folks who know much better than I what the issues are that they're facing in their companies. I think one of the things, though, that comes up quite a lot is the question of, is there increased fraud as a result of the challenges of COVID, including governments pumping money into the economy, providing certain funds for people to for businesses to receive. And then, you know, anytime you have money somewhere, there's some people who will try to cheat the system and commit fraud. So I guess that is a real risk. Whether that is so much in the bribery, you know, in the foreign bribery FCPA context, or sort of in the more traditional area of fraud is something else. But I think perhaps the one thing that might be of interest to folks, especially in the compliance community, is, you know, when, you know, I guess when there's economic challenges and pressures on a company, one of the areas that a company might cut costs in could be compliance. And I think that, of course, would be of a concern to all of you, and I think is a real risk. One of the things that I would recommend you take a look at is the sort of our new newly put out evaluation of corporate compliance programs, which I think is, and this is like everything I'm saying, my personal opinion here, I think is a very helpful document for compliance folks, because it again, the context of that document is, you know, it's the way we evaluate at a time of resolution the state of a company's compliance program, both in the sense of at the time of the misconduct, and then at the time when, if and when there is a resolution. And it's a very detailed document, and it spells out specifically the questions that we are asking companies about the state of their compliance program, including, you know, frankly, about how empowered are the compliance officers in those companies. And we have very, I think, pretty specific and detailed questions that we ask companies, and that you as a compliance officer, you know, may want to take a look at and ask internally, because that's really that's what we go by when we look at evaluating how a company's compliance program has worked. And I think it's, in some ways, again, my personal view, I think it's quite helpful for compliance officers to take that document, because I think part of the intent here is to try to empower compliance officers within their companies. And so I think in light of the risk that many of you may be facing with cuts and downsizing and so forth in certain parts of the business, and at the same time the increased perhaps potential of fraud, that might be a document you want to look at quite carefully and study.
And Claire, from your side, what are you what do you see as the likely landscape over the next sort of 12 or 18 months? You know, are you anticipating an uptick in bribery cases and fraud cases, and increased pressure on yourselves to investigate those?
So we have already noticed an increase in fraud and other financial crime during COVID, especially cybercrime and fraudulent investment schemes. But most of these cases do go to our law enforcement partners in the UK, so especially the City of London Police or National Crime Agency, because the SFO's remit is really limited, usually but not exclusively, to those high value multi-jurisdictional cases. But we are contributing to Project Othello, which is a campaign being spearheaded by the National Economic Crime Centre, and like a number of other agencies, so the CPS, FCA, HMRC, we're contributing to this campaign, which targets fraudsters who are duping members of the public out of billions of pounds in connection with fraud, so connection with donations during COVID times. And we've been contributing to the National Economic Crime Centre by seconding 5 members of staff for some time now, so not just for COVID, but we are contributing to that way in terms of the response. Lessons for us going forward is to really enhance our IT infrastructure. Is a key need, including our capacity for digital forensics to handle the amount of data we're receiving. So we recently recruited a new permanent chief technology officer, and we've submitted a bid for more funding for IT through the Economic Crime Review. So we're hopeful that will address some of our IT challenges. And we've just this period has exemplified just how important international cooperation is for us. So we're really building on our relationships with UK and international partners as well as the private sector. And of course, at this time, as everyone will be aware, the UK left the EU at the start of this year, and the withdrawal arrangements are until the end of the year. So we are hopeful, and we're contributing very much to discussions in the hope that there will be a deal. But well-rehearsed plans are in place in the event that we do not reach a deal, where we'll resort to tried and tested pre-existing cooperation tools. But this is an issue that we're facing alongside COVID going forward, that we're moving forward with.
And I think one of the other things you've mentioned, the IT challenges likely going forward, but I think the SFO has been quite innovative in terms of the use of AI to or predictive coding to do deep dive searches on documents. Is that something which is being introduced across all cases, or do you think in the future, again, not asking you to reveal any state secrets, but just to give a flavor as to whether that is part of the IT package going forward, that you're able to search through documentation at a better, more efficient rate because of the improved IT and coding?
So currently we have what has been termed generally an LPP robot, which is not a robot, but it's an algorithm, which we've only used in a very few cases so far. So it was used, for example, in the Rolls-Royce case in relation to, which led to a DPA, and it's been used in two, I would say, contentious cases that come to my mind, but it's still relatively, it's not been expanded throughout the organization, but it has been very handy in terms of sifting through vast volumes of material, but we're not entirely reliant on AI, so everything still has a human involvement. So we still have great hordes of particularly counsel from the independent bar reviewing this material after the robot has predicted what is most likely to be LPP or not LPP. We still have a human determination at the end of the day.
And David, there's we'll leave Claire's piece there. We could go on for ages because there's I think disclosure guidelines coming out from the Attorney General's office in the near future in the UK. So I think there will be further developments on that side which are yet to be released. But David, there's a question from the audience in relation to whether you think there needs to be any specific instructions in relation to COVID-related integrity risk in terms of the guidance. Or do you think, frankly, that this type of thing is likely to disappear and largely be ignored by investigators and prosecutors stateside in the future because it's simply a risk and companies need to deal with it?
Yeah, it's well, whether COVID is going to just likely disappear, others have hypothesized that would happen, that hasn't. So I doubt that that's going to disappear quickly. It's a good question. I think the straight up answer is no. There's nothing in that program that specifically addresses COVID risk. But I think what's important to keep in mind, one of the main issues is that we ask of companies is, what is your risk profile? And that risk profile that a company has could depend on the company's size, could depend on the industry, on the geographic footprint, what have you. And I think one of the key things that I think a well-established compliance program within a company is able to do is to conduct a risk assessment, from time to time, to do periodic risk assessments to see where are the most critical risks for us in terms of fraud or bribery or what have you. And I think in light of the current COVID situation, I would imagine that many companies are thinking about, do we as a company have increased risk areas as a result of COVID? And if so, how can we adapt our compliance program? How can we adapt our business to, identifying those risks, assessing them, and then remediating them? So I think while it's not, the document, and it's obviously a publicly available document, is not specific to any particular period, including COVID, I think it's helpful because it aims to identify, here are the things that a company might want to think about writ large. What are our risks? What are our policies, our procedures? Is our testing, is our training, suitable to those risks? And I think that the key thing, though, from our perspective, you have to do a risk assessment. If you don't do a risk assessment, you don't know where your risks are, then how can you design an effective compliance program? So I would answer the question in a long way by saying, adapt your risk assessments to COVID to see whether, as a result of COVID, you as a particular company in a particular place have increased risk, and if so, then hopefully the program can be adjusted in that regard. Hopefully that's at least somewhat helpful answer.
No, that's fantastically helpful. And I know that there are other questions coming through, but I think they're probably best dealt with by our next speaker, because I think they relate to more advice as to what sectors and jurisdictions are likely to be areas of focus. And no doubt neither of you would want to say, no, we're only looking at this, therefore all of you other sectors can continue whatever bribery you want to do. So you're not likely to be able to want to answer that. But thank you very much indeed for your presentations. Feel free to disappear off, or if you do want to hang around and listen in for the rest of the afternoon, you're very welcome. But as I will say to others, if you're able to switch off your videos and microphones, and if you are, we'll see you later. If not, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, I will have to drop off, but thank you very much for having me, and hopefully you have a good and successful conference. Take care.
Thank you.